Hello, this is Dr. Mercola, and today I'm joined by Dr. Kate Rayón-Bleu, who is a naturopathic physician, and she's the author of Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox, which is a phenomenal book about one of the most important vitamins that we know of, which is vitamin K2. And it's the best book I've read on this highly underappreciated topic. And I'm just delighted to have her here today to share her insights on this really important area. And she comes today from Canada, so thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
How did you transition into your interest about vitamin K2?
I tuned into the emerging research about K2 back in 2007, early in 2007, and not long before I had read Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston Price. And when I learned about K2, I thought, hey, you know what, I'm sure Price talked all about this in his book. And so I went to the book and looked through it and didn't find any reference to vitamin K2, and I was really stumped. And a little bit later in 2007, read a brilliant article by Chris Masterjohn that links vitamin K2 to Price's work on Activator X. And once I realized that link, you know, the light bulb went on about how important this nutrient is, how overlooked it's been for so long. It just is such it really provides the missing piece to the puzzle of so many health conditions, and yet it was being completely overlooked despite the overwhelming amounts of modern day research. And so I figured somebody would be writing a book about it soon, and waited a little while, and nobody did, and that's when I realized that I needed to do that because people need to know this information.
Terrific, I'm glad you did. As I mentioned earlier, it's really probably the best, well, it is the best book I've ever read, and I haven't exhaustively reviewed the others, but I suspect it is the best book ever written on this really important topic. So can you really describe what vitamin K is for our viewers?
Sure. Vitamin K is actually a group of fat-soluble vitamins, two main ones. Most people are familiar with vitamin K1, and when they say vitamin K, they're referring to K1, which is found in green leafy vegetables, very easy to get in the diet.
And this is actually, which, excuse me for interrupting, but what we really see in the literature or in the newspapers, and they hardly ever differentiate between vitamin K1 and K2. They just say vitamin K, no number attached
Exactly,
to it.
and that's created a lot of confusion. It's one of the big reasons why this important nutrient was overlooked, and it still creates confusion when we learn about this nutrient. So K1, found in the green leafy vegetables, easy to get in the diet, and it exclusively participates in blood clotting. That's its only role in our health. K2 is very different. It comes from different food sources, and its role in the body is in moving calcium around. So specifically, it will guide calcium into the bones and teeth where we want it to be, and it will get calcium out of, so prevent the deposition and even remove calcium from areas where we don't want it to be, like soft tissues, arteries, for example, where calcium can cause hardening of the arteries. So K2 is really critical for keeping our bones strong and our arteries clear. So those are majorly important health concerns, and K2 is a very important nutrient for those health concerns.
And the other vitamin that we think of with calcium, of course, is vitamin D. So can you comment on the interaction between vitamin D and vitamin K2?
This is another really interesting story because we've heard so much about vitamin D and the importance of vitamin D for our health, and a lot of people are taking vitamin D, and yet D and K2 partner up together. So a lot of the health benefits that you want from vitamin D, really you need to have K2 with it for that to work. So when you take vitamin D, your body creates more of these vitamin K2 dependent proteins, so the proteins that will move the calcium around. So they have a lot of potential health benefits, but until the K2 comes in to activate those proteins, those benefits aren't realized. And so really, by taking vitamin D, you're creating an increased demand for K2, and D and K2 work together to strengthen our bones and improve our heart health.
Yeah, it's really the cement, the important part of the cement that integrates the calcium into the bone matrix.
That's right. You know, for so long we've been told to take, say, calcium for osteoporosis, calcium, calcium, more calcium, and vitamin D with that, which we know is helpful, but then more studies are coming out showing that increased calcium intake is causing more heart attacks and strokes. And that created a lot of confusion around whether calcium is safe or not. And really, that's the wrong question to be asking, because we'll never properly understand the health benefits of calcium or vitamin D unless we take into consideration K2, and that's what keeps the calcium in its right place.
You've differentiated between vitamin K1 and K2, and I'm wondering if you can give us an idea of what our needs are and what the typical person might be consuming in their diet?
Well, the optimal amounts of vitamin K2 are just being established, and we're still sort of refining that. But it seems like around 180 to 200 micrograms of vitamin K2 should be enough to activate all of our body's K2-dependent proteins to get the calcium where it needs to be and get it out of the places where it shouldn't be. So the most recent clinical trials use around those amounts of K2. And the average person is getting a lot less than that, that's for sure. In the North American diet, you can see as little as maybe 10% of that or less, and certainly not near enough to be able to optimize bone density and improve heart health.
Okay. And it gets even a little trickier because not only is there a difference between vitamin K1 and vitamin K2, which you just mentioned, but then K2 subdivides into a whole variety of other different types, sublevels of K2. So
that's right.
Why don't you address that for a moment?
That's right. It does get a little bit technical, but this is very important for people to understand that there are different types of vitamin K2. So the two big categories of vitamin K2 that you'll find are something called MK4, which is menaquinone 4, which can be found in butter, egg yolks, and animal-based foods. That's a short-chain form of vitamin K2. And then there is a longer-chain forms that we find from fermented foods. So there's a variety of these long-chain forms. The most common one that you'll see is MK7 or menaquinone 7. And this is the one I tend to tell people to look for in supplements, because in a supplement form, the MK4 products that you will find on the shelves are actually synthetic. They are not derived from natural, say, animal source foods. Those are synthetic, which does create some confusion. Whereas the MK7, these long-chain natural bacterial derived vitamin K2 is from a fermentation process. And that seems to offer a number of advantages. So the long chain form, the MK7, stays in the body longer. It has a longer half-life, which means you can just take it once a day, very convenient dosing. That's the form that's being used in the most current clinical trials on bone density and heart health. So those, that long chain form is really very useful and practical.
When it's compiled or processed into a supplement, do you know a bit about that process? Is it just specifically extracting the MK7, or are there other forms that are in there too, like MK9, MK11, MK13?
So you are getting primarily MK7 because typically these are being extracted from sources like MK7 is typically extracted from natto bean, and the actual natto product has about 90% MK7 to start with. So really you're getting essentially just MK7. You may have very trace amounts of the other types of menaquinones, the technical term for vitamin K2, whereas cheeses, for example, Gouda, very high in vitamin K2, and Brie, those will have a whole range of different types of vitamin K2.
So as you mentioned, the average person is probably only getting 10% of their vitamin K2 requirement, predisposing them. First of all, let's get into that area. What does this fact mean? What does that translate to? The fact
Good
that
point.
people are only taking 10% of what there are recently appreciated understanding of what their optimal needs are.
Right. So this ultimately leaves us at risk for osteoporosis, heart disease, heart attack, and stroke, as well as a number of cancers. So, I talked about vitamin K2 moving calcium around the body. Its other main role is to activate proteins that control cell growth. So that means K2 has a very important role to play in cancer protection. So when we're lacking K2, we're at much greater risk for osteoporosis, heart disease, and cancer. And these are three concerns that used to be relatively rare. And over the last 100 years, as we've changed the way we produce our food and the way we eat, they have become very common. And the lack of K2 is playing a really big role there. When we talk about nutrients together, we like to hear about ratios and optimal ratios. And that hasn't been perfectly elucidated, but I would say for every 1,000 international units of vitamin D you're taking, you should look at least 100 micrograms of K2, if not, the 150 to 200 range, something like that.
What is the toxicity of a large dose of vitamin K2?
That's the really good news. K2 has no toxicity. There is no known toxic effects. This is something that we see again and again in the literature. That's surprising for people to hear because we're used to, with fat-soluble vitamins, there being a potential for toxicity. The reason why K2 doesn't have a potential toxic effect is because all that K2 does is activate K2 proteins. It'll activate all the K2 proteins it finds, and if they're all activated and you take extra K2, it simply won't do that. And so that's why we don't see a potential for toxicity the way we do with A or D. So that's really good news about K2 and why you don't necessarily need to wait for a test, because we know a lot of good health benefits and no downside. So it's a good thing for you to be taking.
Yeah, I spoke to Dr. Vermeer, who was like
yes.
one of the leading researchers
Yes.
in this, and he was really adamant about that too. No known toxicity at any doses.
Right.
And just getting back to the interconnection with vitamin D, it would seem that the reason for the increased need for vitamin K2 when you're taking high doses of vitamin D is that vitamin D somehow stimulates or activates these vitamin K2 proteins.
Exactly.
And if they don't, and so the protein goes unactivated by vitamin K2. There's more of them. That's why you need more vitamin K2.
Exactly. By taking D, you are essentially creating a greater demand in your body for K2. So if you take D at high doses for a long time and don't have the K2, that's when you're going to start to see problems, or at the very least, you'll be missing out on a lot of the benefits that you want from your D.
Now, this is a really important part, maybe one of the most important parts of the interview, is that because of the fact that there is no vitamin K2 test, so let's create one empirically. How would you, what type of quiz would you give a person to know that if their answer to these questions
Right.
is no, then the likelihood of them being vitamin K2 deficient is very, very high, considering 85% of the people watching this are K2 deficient. And I'm sure we're both in agreement
Yes.
that the ideal way to get your vitamin K2 is not through a supplement.
Yeah.
It's through food.
Yes.
Good, and that's the way we're designed to do it. So why don't you see if you can take a stab at answering that question to give people a tool, a resource, so that they can identify if they're at risk.
Right. Well, there's two ways you can identify this. You can go through a long list of health concerns and symptoms, osteoporosis, heart disease, diabetes, all of these things. If you have any of those concerns, then you are likely K2 deficient, because those are all connected to K2.
By concern, you mean you actually have these conditions.
You
right?
have these conditions.
Not just
but
worried about it.
That's right. But for the people who don't have those conditions yet, because those can go silent, progress for many years, it's very simple. Do you eat grass-fed foods? Do your eggs and butter and dairy products come from animals that are grazed on pasture? If not, then you're probably low in vitamin K2. Do you eat certain types of special fermented foods? Natto, it's a fermented Japanese soybean food, is the highest food in vitamin K2, which virtually nobody is eating here in North America, certainly some areas of Japan. And or high amounts of goose liver pate, or brie cheese or Gouda. These sound like unusual foods, but they are the cornerstones of certain European, very heart-healthy European diets.
Okay.
So this has been shown to be, so first of all, important thing to mention when it comes to cheese, because this becomes an area of confusion, that because cheese is a bacterial-derived form of vitamin K2, it actually doesn't matter if the cheese came from grass-fed milk. That would be nice, but it's not the grass-fed milk that went into the cheese, it's the bacteria making the cheese, which means it doesn't matter if you're importing your brie from France or getting it domestically. Brie cheese, the bacteria that makes brie cheese, will make vitamin K2. And basically, if you don't have either grass-fed foods or these certain fermented foods in your diet, then you can pretty much be guaranteed that you are K2 deficient. Something that I really hope comes out of the book, if one thing comes out of the book, it would be an understanding of the importance of vitamin K2 for women who are trying to conceive and who are pregnant and growing healthy children. K2 plays a very important role throughout pregnancy for the development of teeth, both primary and adult teeth, the development of proper facial form, healthy facial form, as well as strong bones, and then again throughout childhood to prevent cavities, and throughout adolescence as the skeleton is growing. So really so important for pregnancy and childhood and young adulthood this nutrient.
Are the requirements any higher in pregnancy, especially the third trimester?
That hasn't been investigated, but we do know, so we know in the first trimester we need K2 for the development of primary teeth, second trimester for the development of adult teeth and the face, and then we know that in the third trimester women's K2 levels tend to drop, so there's an additional drain on the system there. So really just as important, or perhaps even more important, to make sure women are getting a lot of K2 during that third trimester of pregnancy, and then again, you know, while breastfeeding. And
So, especially in light of the fact of virtually no toxicity, would it seem reasonable to recommend double, maybe even triple the amount, just to be safe in the third trimester?
Very much so. I just had a baby, and I tripled my K2 intake.
Oh, you tripled exactly.
I tripled my K2 intake throughout the pregnancy.